one song, one theme song of one of the greatest friend movies ever made. And I'm going to just play a little bit of that song for you. And if you know what movie this is from, I don't want you to blurt it out. Okay, we're going to do this orderly, all right? Probably many of you won't, most of you won't. Like probably, honestly. Anyway, if you know what it is, I want you to silently raise your hand. I just want to see how many people are as old as I and remember this movie, all right? So if you can remember what this movie is from, this great friend movie theme song, raise your hand. Okay, turn it off. This is like nobody remembers this but me. Like I would have gotten this if it were me. Maybe some of you remember it and you're just too shy to raise your hand, but it's from the great movie called Brian's Song. All right? Brian's Song. Is it coming back to you now? Like I know it didn't have words, so it threw you, okay? But on a Tuesday night, maybe you remember this, on a Tuesday night, November 3rd, 1971, 36 million people tuned in to watch this ABC television movie of the week. Often hailed as one of the greatest TV movies ever, and certainly one of the greatest film about sports ever. It's about the unlikely friendship between two Chicago Bear players, Gale Sayers and Brian Piccolo. Now, initially, they were rivals for the same position, but they went on to become incredible teammates and friends. And as you know the story, probably when Brian Piccolo was diagnosed with cancer in his mid-20s, Gale Sayers remained by his side, a loyal, true friend, until Brian Piccolo died. This morning, we want to talk about how when we have trials come upon us, we need to make sure that we have somebody who can stand by us. We need a friend who can strengthen and encourage us when we're under attack. Maybe that attack is maybe an illness, or maybe it's a Satan, or just somebody saying bad things about you, or just the ups and downs of life. Whatever it is, we all need friends who will stick by us. And that's why we want to look at this, because especially this is true, and I've said this time and time again, this is true for men. We just don't have, as men, we don't tend to have these kinds of loyal friendships, but we need them. Actor James Caan in the movie played Brian Piccolo. And I saw an interview with him a few weeks ago, and he said that even now, 50 years later, he constantly has men coming up to him and say, you know, I've only cried at one movie in my life, and that's Brian's Song. Now, why is that? Well, I mean, it's sad. You know, the guy dies, and that's sad. But I think there's something else going on. I think what most men are touched by is the beauty of this deep friendship between these two men, because we all kind of wish that we had one too. And we're going to look at this sort of friendship between Jonathan and David. Between David, the young shepherd from Judea, and Jonathan, the king of King Saul, or the son of King Saul. This was a really, really unlikely friendship. Now, David had, just to give some backstory, David had just become an instant celebrity because he killed Goliath, the mighty Philistine giant. And so he was invited to the palace to be congratulated by King Saul, the king of Israel. And when David arrived at the palace, he was carrying the big bloody head of this giant under his arm. I'd be willing to bet that no security guards stopped him, right? They're probably like, just go right in. But the king was so impressed that he insisted that David stay in the palace as his full-time assistant. So everything is going right for David. His fame is growing. His career is skyrocketing. But then all of a sudden the tide turned, and David faced a threat more ominous than even Goliath presented. When King Saul turned on David and began to attack him verbally and physically, and David really didn't know why. From his perspective, he didn't know what to do, but he knew that he sure needed a friend to get through this attack. Now, we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel, verses kind of 18 and 19. I'll have a few of the scriptures on the screen, but I really would like for you to turn to it in your Bibles. It's on pages 228 and 229 in the blue Bibles under the seats. 1 Samuel 18, 19. Because we want to look at this. So first of all, 1 Samuel 18:6. It says that King Saul attacked David because he became insanely jealous. It says, when the men were returning home after David had killed this Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and celebration and dancing and joyful songs and tambourines and lutes. There was this party breaking out, this celebration. But it says that as they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Well, Saul heard this and he was very angry. This refrain galled him. They credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me just only thousands. What more can he get except for the kingdom? And it says from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. He was threatened by David's popularity. Now, eventually, if you know the story, King Saul went just crazy with hatred and jealousy. And he makes David captive over 1,000 men and deliberately sends him because of this into an impossible battle, thinking, right, that David is going to finally be killed. Finally, he won't have to worry about this threat to his throne. And so he sends David, surely he will be killed. Interestingly, if you know the story as it continues a little bit long, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Like a king sending somebody to the front to get killed, hoping that they'll get out of the way. David did the exact same thing himself years later. But as it turns out here, David survives and he returns victorious. And not only that, but he's more popular than ever. And you know what David discovered? He discovered a very important concept that we need to understand. He found out that you can do exactly what God wants you to do. You can be in the smack dab center of God's will for you, and you can still be attacked. You can still have intense opposition. You can be committed, for example, to excellence in your life, and you'll discover that there are people who resent you for that. And probably every one of you has experienced that at one point or another. Instead of being happy for your success or your good fortune or your hard work, they're jealous or threatened by you. And oftentimes, it comes from those who you thought were closest to you, because those are the wounds that hurt the most. But the attacks will come. The attacks will come. And so Jonathan became this loyal friend to David. And 1 Samuel 18 says, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as he loved himself. I think part of what made that movie so powerful is not only that it was two men with this close bond of friendship, but that they were also black and white. This is the early 70s. And it was so powerful when Gail Sayers said this to Brian Piccolo. He just said, I loved Brian Piccolo. I loved him, and I'd like for all of you to love him too. Jonathan and David, they loved each other in the best, most pure sense of the word. Now, to me, Jonathan, I think, is one of those unsung heroes of the Bible, certainly of the Old Testament. We talked a few weeks ago about Barnabas, right? And I said at that time that I think he's one of the unsung heroes of the New Testament. But here we have Jonathan, and I think he's one of the unsung heroes of the Old Testament. We would all like to have a guy like Jonathan on our side, in our corner. And I want to look at why this friendship between these two guys was so positive and so good. And I'm just going to kind of mention a few characteristics that I think mark a good, true, loyal friendship. So the question that we'll be asking ourselves is, like, am I that kind of friend? Like, we can't have 100 close friends, but we can have a few very close friends. Am I that kind of friend to those around me? Or maybe you're thinking, I don't know what to say, Chris, because I don't have any friends like that. Well, we're going to be looking at, maybe we need to be a little more intentional about finding some good friends. But anyway, let's look at some characteristics here of what makes a good friendship. And I think the first one would be that good friends allow this relationship to evolve naturally. They don't force it. They don't push it. They don't rush it. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, like somebody that just really wants, for whatever reason, really wants to be a really good friend with you and to kind of be in your inner circle, and they just try so hard, and it's not that you don't like them, it just isn't, it's just not going to happen for a variety of reasons. When David moved into the palace, He and Jonathan, they were both warriors. They were the same age. They just kind of clicked. And there was this sort of blending of spirits. It wasn't something forced. It just kind of happened. Long before there was trouble, I think that they had spent time together. They had confided in each other. They had probably been on the battlefield fighting together. They laughed together. They were kindred spirits. And you know what? You don't wait until there's trouble to make sure that you have that close friendship. You don't wait till trouble comes to make sure that you have some people in your life that can come to your aid. People who know you well and are concerned about you and love you. We need to have that. That's why one of the reasons why Hebrews 10:25 in the New Testament says, let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as the day approaches. See, I think one of the best places to cultivate these deep friendships is with a shared bond of the Lord. And so to form these friendships at church, and yet so many people are not attending church. They're not making worship a part of their regular life and a part of their regular schedules. And they don't have that close friendship that the bonds of the Lord are the basis of it. I think that's one of the best ways to do it. But regardless, it's got to develop naturally. It can be intentional, but it can't be forced if one person doesn't want to be that close of a friend. The second thing I think is good friends give sacrificially. Good friends are just generous. You say, well, generous with what? Well, generous with everything. Look at what 1 Samuel 18:4 says. This is amazing. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Now, that may not sound like a lot on the surface. Well, Jonathan, he's the prince. Surely he's got tons of these, and he just gives David his hand-me-downs. What's the big deal about that? But you go back into chapter 13 of 1 Samuel, and it says that there were only 2 swords in all of Israel. Saul had one, Jonathan had the other. Israel just hadn't advanced to the point where they had these swords. They just didn't have them. There were just a couple of them. And here Jonathan was giving his to David. See, I think in that gesture, I think what Jonathan was doing was acknowledging to David that, yeah, David, you're going to be the king. Like, it's not going to be me, it's going to be you. And yet they had this intimate friendship that made that okay. I think at some point, I don't know, maybe they were on the battlefield, or maybe they were just walking along, or whatever they were doing, that at some point David told Jonathan that, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be the next king. And then he would tell him about how Samuel came and handpicked him, that it was the Lord's choosing that Samuel would pick David. And so David's like, I'm going to be the next king. And I think that because they were good friends, that made that okay. Because here's another thing that good friends do. Good friends, true friends, they rejoice in your good fortune. They rejoice in your victories. Good friend, be happy for you. Bible says, that we ought to weep with those who weep and laugh with those who laugh and rejoice with those who rejoice. And I think weeping with those who weep, I think it's kind of easier many times than rejoicing with those who rejoice. But if anybody could have been jealous of David, it was Jonathan. Jonathan was a good warrior. One passage in the Bible says that Jonathan took his armor bearer and almost single-handedly killed 20 Philistines. But there weren't any women singing his praise about it when he returned, and there wasn't any big attention given to Jonathan. All of that went to David. But it was okay. It was okay because Jonathan loved David and they were friends. You see, good friends, again, they don't just weep with us when we weep. They genuinely rejoice in your achievements. They're glad when you get promoted. They're glad for you when your kids make the all-star team. They're glad for you when maybe they attain something or achieve something that you've been striving for a long time. They rejoice with you even when you get a hole-in-one. Well, maybe not when you get a hole-in-one, but good friends just aren't, like, they don't get jealous. They're happy for you. They rejoice with you. You say, well, of course, that just makes sense. Yeah, but it doesn't happen a lot of the times, let me just tell you. 1 Corinthians 13 says, love does not envy. And yet we just said a little bit ago that David and Jonathan loved one another. I don't know if you watched one of the college football games yesterday. I guess college football started up again. Yeah, that's good. I'm happy about that. But I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. Because we all know that the real deal comes when basketball season starts. And I cannot wait for college basketball season because Indiana University, you might have heard, has a new coach. It's going to be a new day. It has been a long drought for Indiana University, my half of my alma mater. In fact, check this out. The last season that IU was any good at basketball was the year that we moved here, the 2001-2000 season. Bobby Knight had just been fired. His assistant coach, Mike Davis, was the interim coach, and yet the interim coach took Indiana all the way to the championship game. And the crazy thing about it was to get to that championship game, they had to get past this other team. I can't even say the name. It's spelled kind of like puke, only like it's not, Duke. They had to get past Duke, like it just sticks in my throat. And they beat Duke. It was an incredible game. An incredible victory. Like the fact that they lost the championship game, that was okay because they beat stinking Duke. If you're a Duke fan, I'm sorry for you. Maybe you can form a friendship with a Patriots fan. I don't know. You guys can bond over it. But I got to tell you, as much as I don't like that team, I was forced to rethink my hatred of Coach K and everything Duke. After such a crushing defeat, and he was not used to this, after such a crushing defeat, Mike Krzyzewski got aboard the IU team bus and sincerely, I saw a video of it, sincerely congratulated them on such a great win. Like, I was floored by that. That's pretty good. Right? I mean, that's pretty. Now listen, if even the evil Duke Blue Devils can rejoice when their adversary wins, we can be gracious and happy when our friends win. And Jonathan was patting David on the back all the time. And even though he had to play second fiddle to him, he was okay with that because he was a good friend. Not only that, but Jonathan was a good friend, loyal in adversity. We move into chapter 19. Things get a little tense. 1 Samuel 19:1 says, King Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan was very fond of David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning and go into hiding and stay there. Jonathan didn't just bail out when the going gets tough. But Jonathan stood by and will continue to stand by David's side in adversity, even though it meant that he had to risk his relationship with his father, the king. 1 Samuel 19:4 says, Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, let not the king do wrong to a servant David. He hasn't wronged you. And what he has done has benefited you greatly. Listen, he took his life in his hands when he killed that Philistine, and the Lord won a great victory for all Israel. And you saw it, and you were glad. So why then do you now want to wrong an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Jonathan stood up for David when David couldn't stand up for himself. And listen, a true friend, a good friend, a loyal friend is not two-faced. A good friend is not going to cut you down behind your back, say one thing to you in person, and then say another thing about you to somebody else. In fact, a friend will speak up for you on your behalf. A friend will come to your defense when you're being malignly accused or some bad things happen to you or somebody wants to attack you or there's something going on. They will come to your defense. Well, Jonathan was so persuasive that he convinced his father, King Saul, to change his mind, at least temporarily. Verses 6 and 7 says, Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. And so Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Now Jonathan, he's in the middle of this thing, and he wants to patch up their relationship. He's remained loyal, even though the problem resurfaced again and again and again, and Jonathan was continually caught in the middle. The friendship for Jonathan had to be exhausting and tiring, but he stayed with it. In fact, he said, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you. That's a friend. That's a friend. Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. It was a painful thing. It was a costly thing to Jonathan to be a friend with David, but he stayed with him in adversity. I think one of the main things that can just shoot down a friendship quicker than anything is if you go telling something that the friend confided in you and in you alone. So a good friend protects confidentiality. The Bible says that a while later an evil spirit came upon Saul, and he hurled his spear at David again, but David eluded him. The spear missed him and went into a wall. And at that time, Saul ordered his soldiers to pursue David to his own house and kill him. But David escaped through a window. And verse 20 of 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 1 says, then David went to Jonathan. He's like, what have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to take my life? Never, Jonathan replied. You are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything great or small without confiding in me. Interesting use of words. Why would he hide this from me? It's not so. But David took an oath. He said, your father knows very, very well that I have found favor in your eyes. And he said to himself, Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved that I'm going to kill David. But David said, as surely as the Lord lives, there's only a step between me and death. So David says, I'm going to prove it to you. Now, tomorrow night is a special banquet. Jonathan, your father expects me to be there, but I'm not going to go. And when he finds out that I am not coming, you tell him that you've given me permission to go back to home to offer a sacrifice. If your dad accepts that, then we'll know that he is really not trying to kill me. But if he loses his temper, then you can know for sure that he's angry I'm not there because he had planned to kill me. Jonathan agreed. He said, okay, I'll tell you what. After the banquet, you be hiding out in the field behind the palace. And I'll come out with my armor bearer, and I'll pretend to practice archery. I'll shoot some arrows. If I say to my armor bearer, you better go out further, you better go on out further than the arrow is beyond you, then you can know that I'm signaling you, David, that you better run, because you're right. My father is trying to kill you. But if I say to my armor bearer, the arrows to the side, then you can come on back, because that'll be your cue that my dad's not really trying to kill you. Well, when King Saul noticed David's empty chair at the banquet, and when Saul learned that his own son Jonathan had given him permission to go back to Bethlehem to offer sacrifice, Saul was outraged. Verse 20 says, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse? Like he can't even bring himself now to say David's name because he hates him so much. To your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you. As long as this son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he must die. It says, Jonathan said, I'm not going to do that. Jonathan protested, and King Saul hurled a spear at him, tried to kill his own son. Now, here's one of the greatest understatements in the Bible. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Like I think you're right. I think you're right, David. He's trying to give dad the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, but he's wacky. So, yeah, he's trying to kill you. Now, what I want you to understand is that Jonathan was a friend, and he protected confidential information. Jonathan knew exactly where David was. And I'm sure when he saw that spear come flying at him, I'm sure he probably had a thought, maybe I should tell him, but he didn't. He did not reveal where David was, just really a few hundred yards from the palace. I think one of the real tests of a friendship is the ability to keep a secret. There are some times when somebody shares information with us that just you cannot share. Now, you're wrong. You're wrong if somebody asks you to keep quiet about abuse, or somebody's life is threatened, or somebody's wanting to harm themselves or something. That's a different matter. But if somebody says to you, I've got to unburden myself. Can I just share this with you? Then you keep that. You keep that promise. If somebody trusts enough to share some very intimate personal information, you're not a friend if you cannot keep that to yourself for the rest of your life, if necessary. And man, the Bible talks a whole lot about this, especially in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 11:13 says, a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. Keep that confidence of your friend. I think good friends also communicate truthfully even though it hurts. And this is, I think, so key. We've kind of been taught that we ought to always build people up and we ought to encourage one another, right? So sometimes, does that mean that we ought to just build them up when it doesn't merit it? Should we tell them things that aren't true just because it'll make them feel good about themselves? No, I don't think so. So listen, the next morning, Jonathan, he didn't want to do it. But he went out to the field, he shot the arrow, and he said to his armor bearer, the arrow is out beyond you, the arrow is about beyond you, you better keep going. And so David didn't want to hear it. David didn't want to hear that, but he ran for his life because that was the truth. Evidently, Jonathan realized that nobody was spying on him, so he sent the boy back into the house, and he said to David, come on out here for a minute. Now look at verse 41 of 1 Samuel 20. After that boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone, bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground, and they kissed each other, and they wept together. But David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord. In the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, between your descendants and my descendants forever. Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. Listen, good friends are not afraid to tell each other the truth. Tactfully, lovingly, with much prayer, with being aware of the log in your own eye and all of your flaws and everything else. But there comes a time when, as good friends, we've got to deliver some hard truth. Proverbs 27:6 says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. In other words, when you're attacked or when you're in trouble, you don't need somebody telling you that everything is okay. You don't need insincere flattery. You need somebody who loves you enough to tell you the truth. And if you have a friend who has proven themselves to be a true friend and you trust them, do not dismiss what they tell you, but accept it with grace, even though you might not like it. You might have a friend come to you and say, you know what, I'd watch out for her. I think she's trying to do something, mess you up between you and your wife. Or a friend might come and say, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but you really need to go see a doctor for that thing that you were telling me about. Or hey, listen, I want to talk to you about the other night that we were out and you just had way too much to drink, and I've seen that pattern and I feel like it's the problem. Or hey, listen, I want to talk to you about your kids. That's probably that's the hardest one, isn't it? Right? But don't flare up. Don't just automatically fly off the handle. It may be something you need to hear from the best friend that you've ever had. Proverbs 28:23. He who rebukes a man will in the end gain more favor than he who has a flattering tongue. We know these people, right? These people that just all they do is just butter you up one side and down the other. I mean, just flattering you all the time. And you don't believe anything they say after a while because you hear them doing it to everybody else. And you're like, not everybody else is that awesome like I am, so that person must not be right. Also, a good friend encourages in times of uncertainty. 1 Samuel 23 documents kind of the last recorded meeting between David and Jonathan. David was living at this point as a fugitive in caves. Saul had his armies out trying to find him, and Jonathan found David. It says in chapter 23, verse 16, 1 Samuel, Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Like, I love that. Don't be afraid. He said, my father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel. I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. Have you ever found yourself, metaphorically in a cave, just afraid? And you have somebody who comes up alongside you, and they help you find strength in God. Like, they don't tell you things that you've never heard or that you didn't know, but maybe they just remind you of things that you knew. And oftentimes it's just the presence of that friend that makes you get up and dust yourself off and leave that cave. Jonathan, in David's darkest moment, encouraged his friend to hang in there. Said, listen, I know it looks bad. I know my father is looking for you and all that, but I want you to understand that God is in control. God is going to prevail. Do not lose your faith. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. Good friends find ways to encourage us during the tough times. Years ago, Pee Wee Reese, baseball player, was playing for the Dodgers. This was immortalized in the movie 42 a while ago. But Jackie Robinson, first black player, broke the color barrier. But everywhere Robinson went, there were racial slurs and attacks. But one day, Jackie Robinson made a crucial error in a game in his home field in Brooklyn, and it hurt the team. And his own fans turned on him and began to boo and to hurl racial slurs at him. Jackie Robinson just stood on second base with drooped shoulders. And Pee Wee Reese wasn't playing shortstop, and he just walked over to Jackie Robinson, stood beside him, and put his arm around his shoulder. And Jackie Robinson was encouraged, and the boos subsided. Jackie Robinson later said, that arm around my shoulder probably saved my career. Now, you want to endear yourself to somebody for life. You find a friend who you know is under the gun, who is experiencing incredible stress, and you put an arm on their shoulder, and maybe you just say, hey, I'm praying for you, and then actually do it, right? And then you do something to show them that you are their loyal friend. You are their loyal friend. Gale Sayers died last year. Many, many years ago, he wrote a book about his life. It was around the time that the Brian Song movie came out and Brian Piccolo died. And it's kind of partially based on that. But it's a great book. I'd encourage anybody to read it. It's called I Am Third. And this is what he wrote. And in fact, this is what became his life motto. God is first. My friends are second. And I am third. I think that's pretty good. I think most of us would probably stick family in there too. But God is first. And then friends. Family. But I am third. I am third. You want to be a good, loyal friend, you remember that God is first. And you want to put the self-interest of others, especially your friend, above yourself. And then you come third. You think of yourself last. That's why Jesus is such a good friend. He's our Lord. He's God. He's the almighty creator of the universe. He was there when it all began. But he also says, now I call you friends. And our friend did not abandon us in our hour of need. He didn't abandon us in our sin. He put our need for forgiveness from our sin over his desires, right? At one point he said, Father, take this cup of suffering away from me. But then he said, no, your will be done. This is the same Jesus who put his interest below ours. When Paul wrote that, but he was God, but he didn't consider equality God something to be held on to. But he emptied himself of his godhood and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Because he needed to do that for us. Thinking of himself last, as he always did in his ministry. If we want to be good friends, if we want to be the kind of friend that somebody might save somebody's life in an hour of need, we need to get off the throne of our ego, get God on there first, others around us second, And then we need to strive to subdue our interest to the needs and to the interests of others. And even as Jesus was hanging on that cross, in his moment of need, his moment of agony, when he was taking everything upon himself, the weight of sin of the entire world for all ages upon himself, he kind of thinks of himself last, and he talks to the guy next to him, encouraging him, hey, today you'll be with me in paradise. Now, if we want to make sure that we are going to be with Jesus in paradise, in heaven, that means that we need to lower ourselves and admit that we are sinful people. And that the only way that we're going to have a relationship with God for all of eternity is through this one, Jesus Christ, who died for us.